All right. Hello, everybody. I am Julie, or Julie CL, and this is the third tutorial video on Tactics Memoriam, a new tabletop role-playing game about changing the shape of the afterlife with your blade, playable with just dice and a chessboard. If you're here, you have probably already seen the previous two videos. So we're going to go right into how combat works. You've probably already seen the system overview and gotten a bit of combat there. You probably already understand how character creation works for the most part. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth as to how the game works. Again, something covered a bit in the system overview, but we are going to go deeper into it now. So again, accessibility was very important for me when designing Tactics Memoriam. I don't want you to ever feel like you are stuck with nowhere for your story to go because you need to make up everything on the fly. So that's why I have this determining what's to come section. We have a section for rolling for what the objective of your next battle is going to be and why it might be happening. So let's just do it. Let's just roll and see the reason for the next battle. We've expended all our downtime points, and we're going to basically find our way into this next combat as the fiction demands. So we are going to have to, number 3, capture a tile or zone occupied by enemies by outnumbering their units atop it with your own. This could be anything from a simple Fire Emblem Seize Throne mission where you're just trying to take out a tough unit standing on top of an objective square and stand on top of it with your own, or maybe it can be something of a bigger scale. Maybe there's a 4x4 set of tiles in the middle of the board where your enemies are trying to perform a ritual or something along those lines, and you need to outnumber their units atop that little 4x4 square to stop the ritual from happening. So you're going to be moving them around and trying to get on top of it yourselves, while weathering the assault from them. And let's figure out why this battle is happening. At the bottom of the same page, there's a justification as to why there is this next objective. Note to self that for the final game, I might switch these two sections in order. I might have you roll for the fiction as to why it's happening and then roll for the objective. So let's see. Number 2, it's an enemy ambush. Oh, that is interesting. So in some way, we are ambushed and we need to capture this tile or zone held by the boss in order to scare off all the enemies. Maybe that is just a show of our might in order to seize this place. Maybe we are trying to stop this ritual of maybe a big spell that's being cast on us from the middle of our campsite. Maybe we appear from all around the enemies, etc. The options are as to why the next battle is happening does include more basic things like defeating the stage boss or bosses or defeating all enemies, but there are things more complicated even than just capturing a certain amount of tiles, such as surviving waves of enemies for 10 rounds of battle, or defeating a boss in a short 5-round limit, facing 3 short marathon battles with no downtime between, which would mean no healing. So, that's one of those situations where it's useful to have recruited multiple units so that you can kind of switch them in and out of the battle. Have all of your units escape the map by crossing to the other side, or rescue a new character or 2 from enemies. If they survive, they will join you. So hopefully between all these prompts, you can play this game totally solo and have a lot of options as to what the next battle will be. On the next page, we have unit deployment. After determining a reason for the fight, you want to determine the scale of the next battle. So rather than deciding the amount of enemies first, you're going to decide the amount of playable units you're going to bring to the battle, and then scale the enemies to you. So based on this guide, when you have 5 or less playable units, you bring them all to combat. 5-ish units is typically a good amount for a decently sized battle in Tactics Memoriam. When you have at least 6 playable units, you roll 1d4 plus 2 to determine how many units you will deploy for the next battle. So if you roll a 2 on your d4, you would add 2 to that, so you bring 4 units to the next battle. The reason for that is that there is some variance in size. You're not just bringing 6 every time because, hey, maybe it's more interesting if it's a map where you have a smaller force trying to escape or seize a point or something along those lines. All of this is to add variance. And then after your party grows to 8 or more units, roll 1d6 plus 2 to determine the scope of the next battle and how many units you can bring. 8 or more units means anyone from like 8 to 30 depending on how your campaign goes, because even in these strategy games, you can only bring a limited amount of units, and chessboards are not large. This game is made to be scaled down to a chessboard. It's still good to have a large party. It's still good to have a lot of units you can switch in and out of different battles for different situations, deploy different units for different situations, maybe have them in the wings in case you have any like marathon battles and your GM lets you switch units between different marathon maps with no downtime, etc. But for the most part, you're not going to want to play games of Tactics Memoriam with more than 8 player units on one chessboard. It just gets a little crowded. If you decide to stick multiple chessboards together, that's a whole other conversation. But basically, by deciding how many units you are going to bring to the next map, you can scale it. This next section here is enemies and battle difficulty. This just lays out a very easy guide for how many enemies should appear in your next battle. For an easy battle, the enemies should field the same amount of units as you, because enemies typically don't have access to things like a deathly technique, or all these different skills that your units might have put together. For an intermediate battle, the stage will feature 1 or 2 more enemy units than you can deploy. In a difficult battle, the enemy has 3+ more units fielded than the players. Then to determine what enemies you will face, you can roll on the same class table as the Finding Friends section. This table appears a few times. It is basically just the same table of 8 different classes in Tactics Memoriam. And if you're not sure how difficult you want the battle to be, in this section here, you can also just roll a d6 to see whether you're dealing with an easy, intermediate, or hard battle. The beginners should stick with easy until they feel comfortable with the game. Hard battles can be really difficult in Tactics Memoriam, and I am attesting that from a good amount of playtesting. More enemy units, even with action economy being limited to 3 units moving per turn and 2 units attacking per turn, can make things pretty tough. So once you have set up the map, basically, you have battle preparation. You should let your players switch their characters' inventories around and choose who to bring. We don't want it to feel totally random as to who you're bringing to the next battle, because we want you to strategize beforehand. Is there an excess of armored enemies? Make sure to bring units with breaking weapons. Oh, one other thing. When you are rolling for what enemies you face, we don't recommend using more than 4 different classes of enemy present, not only so that they can easily be represented with the same types of chess pieces, but also because it just becomes a lot to keep track of, remembering that, oh, the archer has the wing shot skill, the valiant has the boldness skill, on top of tracking all of the skills for your characters. Especially for playing solo, just try to keep battles super simple. A battle map of all Sky Knights could have a flavor of itself. Why are you fighting all Sky Knights? Are they Sky Pirate Raiders? Who knows? Turns, I talked about this a little bit in the system overview section. Basically, the way the turns work in Tactics Memoriam is that 3 units may move and 2 units may take an action, and then it is the other side's turn. This makes it so that you're not just taking turns moving your units around, you are collaborating with the other people at your table to work together, decide a game plan, and then execute it, and then the enemy side does the same. So that there is going to be this amount of discussion, you're going to be trying to get pincer attacks, stacking sources of advantage, etc. And this is not going off of D&D rules. If you have leftover movement, too bad. After you use an action, you are stuck, because this game is not meant to encourage kiting. Or dodging around the map, not being able to be found. Movement in Tactics Memoriam is decided by squares. Typically, it's 3 to 5 movement, 3 for armors, 4 for runners, 5 for riders, and there is no diagonal movement. You are going to be moving isometrically across the chessboard. You can move through allies, but not enemies, and you cannot end on the same space as another unit. Actions in combat, we have attacking, healing, trading, and using items. Attacking is selecting a weapon from your inventory and using it. Healing in the beta is really only done with rights, which is kind of like the cleric light-based weapon type equivalent for this game. So using those weapons in your inventory, those rights, to heal is an action in and of itself. You could trade with adjacent units because units have a limited amount of inventory slots, 3 for your base classes and 4 for ascended classes. Sometimes it's good to switch items around, trade around shields, trade around items, depending on who needs them. And using an item also costs an action, whether it's throwing a firebomb or changing the weather. Basically anything that is not equipable, rather, such as shields and wards, is consumable, whether it is the weather-changing items, the throwable items, the healing items, etc. So, again, for your turn, 3 units can move, 2 units can take these actions. And the same unit cannot take 2 actions in one turn, unless there's an ability or something that grants them to do so. The same unit cannot attack and use an item, or attack and attack. That is basically the way the game is designed to work. Everyone is supposed to work together. Combat stats is the next page. Level is the measure of units' growth. You will see on the character creation page that level has a little slash and also says unison strike. That's to remind you that if you roll the same value as your level, your character gets a second attack through a unison strike. It's 1 to 10. Excuse me. Ooh, I need some tea. 1 to 10 in Tactics Memoriam. So that's what you're going to be rolling the d10 for, and just keeping an eye if it corresponds to your level. Bonds track closeness to other units. So we talked a little bit about how bonding works during downtime. Bonding in battle has its own section. We'll go over that shortly. Your HP is the stamina of your character that corresponds to a certain number. Once it's dropped to 0, they're gone. Aim is your accuracy with physical weapons, and you also add that number to a unit's d10 rolls when attacking with a physical weapon to see how much damage is done. Excuse me, you add aim to the weapon's might to see how much damage is done. You add the d10 to aim to see if your physical attack hits. This is something I want to put in big letters on the final book. The roll to hit is the d10 plus aim or focus, and the roll for damage is going to be your weapon's might plus aim or focus, depending on whether it is a physical or a magical attack. You only need to roll once in Tactics Memoriam. You don't need to roll for hit and for damage. Anyway, focus is your magical hit, just the magical version of aim. Guard is your physical defense, so when units attack, their roll of the d10 plus their aim plus their aim needs to exceed guard in order to hit. Reflect is kind of your magic defense. Your unit needs to exceed this number to deal damage. And likewise, this is how counterattacks happen. If a unit misses and they have a weapon in their inventory that is able to counterattack, then a counterattack happens. Movement is the amount of squares that a unit can move on their turn. We'll go into this a little bit more with movement types on the next page. Those are basically the stats to worry about in Tactics Memoriam. If it sounds like a lot, I promise it really isn't, because there is a whole section for base stats for each class that you can literally just copy-paste from the character card sheet here. Again, tried to design the game to be very straightforward and accessible in that manner. It seems I've become blurry. Let's see if we can fix that. No? No? Alright. It'll probably fix itself in a second. Movement types. These are the types of units that appear in Tactics Memoriam. I again mentioned this in the overview, but every single unit will fit into either an armor, a runner, or a rider. Armors move 3 squares, runners move 4, riders move 5. Armors have the most stats, runners have middle of the grade stats, and riders have the lowest stats. Runners are your infantry, rider your cavalry, etc. Every unit type has a weakness. Runners are weak to slashing attacks, armors are weak to breaking attacks, and riders are weak to piercing attacks. There's no extra damage, you just get an extra advantage die, so it's a higher chance to hit, and also advantage dice are the only way to critical hit in Tactics Memoriam. When matching numbers come up on the die, boom, that's a critical hit. You add the number on the die to your weapon might plus aim/focus in order to see how much damage is done. So it's important to be equipped to tackle many different types of enemies, and also have many different units on your side that can weather different types of assaults for that reason. Again, it's just a system around advantage or disadvantage. You're not worrying about extra damage. Disadvantage is pretty rare. Disadvantage being when you roll 2 dice and take the lower result, as opposed to advantage, where you roll 2 dice and take the higher result. Disadvantage basically only happens in the base game if imposed through a bond. And it lists a few ways as to how advantage can happen: attacking the weakness, like we were just talking about, pincer attacking an enemy between 2 allies, conditional skills such as wing shots, using a bond is another example. This is really a game of moving your units around and trying to stack sources of advantage to deal damage, build up your deathly technique, which is something we'll be talking about in a second. Melee versus ranged attacks. So keep in mind, adjacency in Tactics Memoriam is decided in cardinal directions, directly north, south, east, or west. There's no diagonal attacking except for a skill that appears later on in the book. For melee attacks, that said, for ranged attacks, you know, if you have a weapon with 2 range, just the way that a chessboard works, 1-2 squares away could be directly diagonal from your unit, so somebody could attack with a bow that way. Now, ranged attacks are pretty strong in Tactics Memoriam, so they do come with downsides. For example, guns can only attack in cardinal directions and never attack diagonally, or firearms, rather, as they're called in this game. But we'll go more into that later. Again, rolling to attack. You try to surpass unit's relevant defensive stat. And note that I've said a few times you need to surpass or exceed a unit's relevant defensive stat. We're not really rolling with meets it beats it in this game because characters already kind of... defense is a little bit different in Tactics Memoriam than in D&D. Defense tends to be a little bit low unless you are purposefully equipping a shield, which is why counterattacks are so powerful. And again, critical hits happen when you're rolling multiple die to attack through stacking sources of advantage, and if you get a match, not only does it hit, it deals that damage of the die to the hit. So if both of the dice land on a 7 when you attack, you're going to add 7 more damage to the total damage dealt. You don't add all of the pairs, you just add the 1 number on the die. At least in the beta, I'm kind of considering making it a little bit more powerful. For the final version, we're just going to playtest a little bit more and see if that feels legit. Counterattacks happen if a unit is missed by an attack. They just deal damage back as if they had attacked. They don't have to roll to hit. You need to have a weapon in your inventory that can counter. So a lot of sigils attack at range, such as the sigil Crush. So if you are attacked at 1 range and the only weapon you have in your inventory is Crush, then you're not able to counterattack as Crush has a range of 3, etc. This section describes pincer attacks. I talked about this a little bit in the system overview, but basically, if a unit is pincered, meaning they have an enemy on 2 adjacent sides to them, so east and west, or north and south, then anyone attacking them gets an advantage die. It doesn't have to be the units pincering them, it can also be someone attacking at range, so that's another way to stack advantage. Unison Strike is something I talked about a little bit as well. Unison Strike happens when your number on the die, your roll on the d10, is the same as your character's level. Then your character gets to attack again, hit or miss. It's the only way to double attack in Tactics Memoriam. There isn't a speed stat, that just seemed like too much to worry about, so you're kind of looking for the magic number on the die that matches your level. So a lot of Tactics Memoriam is looking for magic numbers on the dice, whether it is unison strikes or critical hits, and as we'll talk about later, using bonds to adjust those numbers a little bit. The deathly technique is the thing you are building up to in combat. This is your fighting game super meter. Actions in combat, any sort of forward momentum from your side fills the deathly technique gauge. Attacking, healing, or using a consumable item fills the meter by 1. Using a bond fills the meter by 1, and counterattacking fills the meter by 3 because counterattacking is harder to achieve in Tactics Memoriam. Now, the way that a deathly technique works, it is a fighting game super meter. It is always going to equal 3 times the amount of units you brought to this combat. If you brought 4 units, your deathly technique gauge is going to be 3 times 4, so you need to hit 12 points. So that could be take 12 different attack actions, or take 9 different attack actions and 1 counterattack, etc. Just keep track of this gauge ticking up, because that allows you to unleash your super move. You can either deal instantly an amount of damage equal to a number of d10s that corresponds to the number of units you brought to battle. So if you brought 4 units, you're going to roll 4 d10s and deal that damage to an enemy. Half as much to a boss, just because otherwise it might be a little bit unfair. You could also heal a unit by that amount if you just don't want them defeated or wounded, or once per campaign, you can bring somebody back to life. You can bring a defeated unit back into battle, even if they have already received 3 wounds and been brought to oblivion. Describe how it happens and how everybody's convictions brought it all together. So I hope now you're kind of getting a flow for how the combat of Tactics Memoriam goes. You are moving units in coordinated assaults. You are stacking sources of advantage, pincering enemies, keeping an eye out for critical hits and unison strikes, and letting this deadly technique gauge to unleash it all at once. And with the different types of maps available, there are a lot of different variations in which to apply these strategies. This last section here for how combat works is using bonds in battle. So I mentioned in the previous video that characters can achieve bonds with one another or start with them at the beginning of a campaign, and they grant bonuses depending on the strength of the bond. A bond of any rank can be called upon to grant an attacker an extra advantage roll, so you can just call upon a bond and say, boom, you have advantage. Likewise, while being attacked, you can impose disadvantage on an enemy. When initiating attack, after seeing the roll to hit, you can call upon one of your bonds to shift the value of the die up or down by the amount of the bond. So this is really strong, which is why bond ranks only go up to 3. We're rolling d10s, being able to shift them by 3 is already pretty big, because you can grant a critical hit pretty easily, like a good fraction of the time. So that's one thing that you want to use effectively in battle. You can kind of just make critical hits happen once per character, because characters can only call upon their bonds 1 time per battle. Not 1 time per bond, but our protagonist Annis can call upon 1 bond in the battle. You would describe why it's happening in the fiction, and then its effect would take place. You can also call upon a unit's bond to heal them by one of their bonded allies' stats, aim, focus, guard, or reflect, etc. I think this section does not specifically say that you can use a bond to grant disadvantage towards an enemy, which would therefore negate critical hits, but I'm the creator of the system. It's there. It was just it's a lot of words putting a whole TTRPG together, and I'm glad I'm seeing changes that I want for the final version now. So that is the overview of how combat works. We're going to talk about classes now. So progression in Tactics Memoriam, leveling up is something that should probably happen every few maps. Thinking about when you want your campaign to end. If you want to play a campaign that only goes to level 5 and you want it to be like 5 sessions, sure, level them up every session. But if you want to have a long campaign that goes up to level 10, maybe stretch it out a little bit. Leveling up itself works by adding 2 points across HP, aim, focus, guard, or reflect. You can choose how to level up units. It's not random like Fire Emblem. And you might have remembered that when you are creating a character, you add 2 points to their stats. The way the Tactics Memoriam is designed is that when you are creating a unit, no matter what level they are joining at, whether they are joining at level 1 or level 5 or level 6 or level 10, you are multiplying their level by 2 to correspond those 2 points gained every level and adding it to their stats. That is how you customize units, no matter what level you are dealing with in Tactics Memoriam. So even designing enemies can be pretty easy. You know, a level 5 enemy, just add 1 point to HP, or excuse me, just add 2 points to HP, aim, focus, guard, and reflect, because that corresponds to all of their levels. All right, we are on to base classes, which is, as a strategy nerd, something I'm really excited about. There are 8 different base classes in Tactics Memoriam. There are 3 runners, 2 armors, and 3 riders, 2 of which are flyers, and there are different branching promotions for each of them. So there's going to be a lot of classes in the final game. Just think about it, there's like 20-ish classes in the final game, which is kind of the amount that I'm rolling with around now. And there are ascended classes after that. You have a lot of different ways to make characters unique. So we're going to go through them quickly. Warriors, wielding the heaviest of weapons with ease. Warriors prioritize offense over defense, break the shield and spirit of your enemy before they break your own. They use hammers or axes, so when they're created, you choose whether you want them to deal breaking or slashing damage, depending on what your party needs. I would probably recommend going with hammers, just because breaking damage is pretty rare in the beta version of this game. We don't have any default gauntlet classes in this version of the game, or aura classes in the version of this game. We'll get there for the final version. And their skill is Destroyer. They deal extra damage equal to their target's guard on a critical hit. Archers are your bow-using units. Their skill is Wing Shot. When attacking flying enemies, they can gain an extra advantage die, so they're just good at getting critical hits on flyers. Menders are our healers. They use rights. After healing an ally with the right, they can heal another ally within 2 spaces, equal to the wielder's focus. Valiants are our first armor unit, the previous 3 being runners, meaning they are weak to breaking attacks instead of slashing attacks. Their skill is Boldness. They can move +2 spaces when moving entirely in a cardinal direction, so a Valiant is kind of the anti-armor. They are able to kind of like Legend of Zelda Link jumping slash to cross the battlefield and land in the middle of enemies with their higher stats. War Mage is very different from Valiant. They do not have a way of going farther, but they do have sigils, which grant them ranged magic attacks, so therefore they would target Reflect instead of Guard. Their skill is Tactical Eye. They gain an extra advantage die on an attack when an ally is adjacent to them. Tracker is our first rider class, therefore weak to piercing attacks, so polearms typically, firearms, bows, etc. Trackers are also our first knife-wielding unit. Atop tamed beasts of Memoria or taking the form of beast folk themselves, they are equally skilled at chasing down their prey as they are at eliminating them. I like trackers a lot. They are true glass cannons. Their skill is Wild Mount. They can move through 1 enemy per turn to immediately deal damage to them equal to their level ×2. So trackers can deal damage without even expending an action. It's not a lot of damage, but combined with decent attack stats and the versatility of knives, they can be really good at taking out solo enemies or wearing down bosses and moving through them, running away while your other units mob them, basically. Sky Knights are a little bit more balanced, and they are our first flyer. So they're treated as rider units, but they can fly over enemies and obstacles, and they have additional weaknesses not just to piercing weapons, but to skills such as Wing Shot, to weapons such as the Errant Halberd, which grants an extra advantage die when attacking flying units. Their skill is Dive Bomb. When attacking runner and armor targets at melee range, they gain a bonus to hit equal to their level, and also critical hit damage equal to their level. So Sky Knights are good at basically attacking grounded enemies. That basically allows them to invest more of their stats in their defenses if they so choose, versus other rider units, which tend to have lower stats across the board, because Sky Knights tend to have those extra advantages when attacking certain units. The Swift is our Wind Mage, our Flying Mage. Their skill is Air Shuffle. After successfully damaging a target, unit may immediately move to any panel adjacent to their target's current space, or adjacent to their former space if the attack defeats or moves them. So Swifts are very mobile, they're very fragile, they are just meant to deal elemental magic damage very quickly. So those are the base classes of Tactics Memoriam. That's what you're going to be rolling with for most of the game. Though when you have the ability to ascend units, whether it is through the Power Through Change item, or a significant story event, or through enough bonding actions so that you've reached a total of 10 bond ranks for a unit, they have the ability to ascend, which is your 2nd tier class promotion, which can completely change the way a unit plays. So the example listed here, the Warrior is an interesting one to ascend because they can become a bunch of different classes. They can be a Berserker, keep the runner movement type, gain the ability to attack again after a critical hit, which synergizes well with the Warrior's extra damage on critical hits, kind of just for a better version of the same character. They gain the skill of the ascended class, and they gain a little bit of extra stats and possibly an extra weapon. The Warlord changes a warrior's movement type into Rider. Now that's kind of big. You could completely change the format of your army. Oh, you have too many runner units? Well, good news. Some units can change their movement type upon ascension. And the Warlord would grant the former warrior an extra weapon type, potentially even something ranged like arrows, because you get a choice, and they deal extra damage when they're at full HP. The Titan changes the warrior's movement type to armor and has some real game-changing effects. They now take up a 4x4 panel of squares rather than just one, and when they attack, if they deal damage, their attack ripples out as a shockwave. So your units can end up completely different because of these branching ascensions. Most units have 2 ascended classes that they can choose to become. The warrior is one example that has 3, so I wanted to detail them here. We'll go pretty quickly through a few of them here. We already went through the warriors. Let's talk about some of the less straightforward ones. Like the Hawkeye gains access to arrows or firearms upon ascension. Their skill is sniper stance. They gain an extra attack action if they do not use a movement action this turn. So the Hawkeye can go bam, bam with either arrows or firearms. That's a little bit straightforward. Most of them are going to be like that, but something like the Pure Heart, which is an Ascended Mender class, gets the skill Invigorating Blessing. Unit may take a healing action on an ally with full HP to grant them another movement and attack action. It can only be used on one ally per turn, even if there are multiple units healed at once, and it cannot be activated on the enemy's turn via a bond use. If the skill is used on other units with Invigorating Blessing, they cannot activate their own use of their ability on this turn. That's a lot of words to say that the Pure Heart is not just a healer, but it is also a Fire Emblem Dancer if they use a healing action on somebody with full HP. Most of these are pretty straightforward otherwise. There's some that I think are really cool for the different flavor that they can add. So for example, our Swift, our Wind Mage, could ascend to a Zephyr, which is a pretty straightforward upgrade. They gain the skill Discorporate. After taking damage, they can immediately teleport up to 2 tiles from their current position and deal damage to their attacker equal to their level, which is just kind of a nice little, you have a very mobile damaging mage, now they have a get out of jail free card, basically, and deal a little bit of damage. They could also ascend to a Stormlord, where the Swift would gain access to pole arms upon ascension, so they gain the option to attack physically. Their ascension bonus, they gain +3 to the lower of aim or focus, so that they can become a mixed attacker. And their skill Tempestuous Magic, their unit, their movement is uninhibited by weather, and when a weather condition is active, they gain +1 range with all attacks, so they love to be in weather conditions. Now, you might also have noticed, looking through the book, that some units share different ascended classes that they could become. For example, the Sky Knight and the Swift could both become the Stormlord, but the Swift can become the Zephyr, whereas the Sky Knight can become the Sky King, which gives them like a dive bomb attack, where they come crashing down and deal an AoE. So some units share these classes, these commonalities, and yeah, it's a pretty exciting moment when your character gets to ascend for the first time. Pay attention not just to the skill that you're going to add to their sheet, because you gain the class skill that you're just going to copy-paste onto the character sheet. Let's just do one for example. Let's say that our protagonist, Annis, from last time decides to promote to a Vanguard. We are going to go to the skills section. There is a class skills section. We'll go to Ascended Classes. Heroic Conviction is the name of the Vanguard skill. And let's just paste it, values only here. Boom. So after rolling a Unison Strike or critical hit, after the attack is resolved, Annis and one other ally of your choice recovers HP equal to Annis's aim. So now you can attack and heal a little bit at the same time every once in a while. So this really helps fill out those builds very strongly, ascending classes. It's something that me, as a big strategy nerd, is really excited to playtest more, because there's a lot of really varied classes here. I recommend looking through the book themselves, and again, it's totally free on itch, totally free on DriveThruRPG, and you can donate to our Kickstarter, which is doing pretty well, for access to even more via the full game. There's a section here for creating your own classes, because there are rules, basically, for how the base stats for armors, runners, and riders work. I don't need to go through all of it now. It's probably just most straightforward to read it and try it for yourself. But there's an example here for creating a class that is going to be kind of a gun mage, a fusilier, where you might start them off with firearms and grant them the skill Lightning Barrage as their class skill, and Curving Strike, which lets them use firearms diagonally. And then when they ascend, you grant them access to elements and give them a skill representing their ascended class as well. Pretty straightforward, one that boosts their focus so that they can attack with magic and physical firearms. So there's just kind of a step-by-step guide for creating your own classes here. Weapons. So there are 11 different weapon types in Tactics Memoriam between physical and magical. There's going to be 12 in the final game. There's going to be something called auras, which is kind of like your physical, or excuse me, not physical, your melee magical attacks. Pigment weapons are kind of the basic ones. They deal just a little bit of damage. And there's 3 different weapons per weapon type. So for example, swords have a Figment Sword, a Bandit's Cutlass, and a Beastbone Rapier. And they all have different effects. The Bandit Cutlass adds a +3 to hit on initiation, so it's good for attacking high defense enemies. The Beastbone Rapier adds +3 to your guard when in a unit's inventory, and counterattacks from its wielder deal additional damage equal to the user's level. So this is good on a defensive unit to kind of parry and strike. All the descriptions are here. For the most part, weapons are made to be pretty straightforward. There are some more complicated ones, such as gauntlets, which is only, I believe, usable by custom classes, or the Berserker right now are a little bit more complicated. The Serpent Wraps deal damage equal to the target's guard instead of the wielder's aim. And the Deathmatch weapon might triples on attack and counterattack if the target and attacker have no other units adjacent to them. But basically there's a decent spread of slashing, piercing, and breaking weapons here. It's going to be even more balanced in the final game when more breaking weapons get added via auras, and more gauntlet and aura using classes are added. Magic is also here as well. Magic does not work off of MP or spell slots. Magic is just treated as a weapon in your inventory, like a sword would be. Sigils, elements, and rites are your magic weapons in the beta version of Tactics Memoriam. And something that these have in common with other ranged weapons here, arrows and firearms, is that they tend to have a penalty, because ranged attacking is pretty strong in Tactics Memoriam. Rather than just lowering the might of ranged attacks, I decided to go with having downsides to them. Hopefully you can't hear that car alarm outside. So arrows cannot counterattack at melee range, firearms cannot attack in cardinal directions, sigils tend to have a very specific range to their attacks, and elements can backfire on the user if you roll a 1 on the d10. They deal damage equal to the weapon's might. Rights are mostly healing, so they're fine. There is one damaging right in this game. I was deciding whether I wanted to have, for the third right that is represented in this game, to be a ranged heal or an offensive heal, and I decided to go with the offensive heal because I just think it's more fun. The Voice of Scorn is one of my favorite weapons. The weapon might doubles against targets who took an attack action in the previous turn. So you can just deal a bunch of damage to somebody who has dared raise their blade against you, against your soft, pure little Mender or Pure Heart. So that's a quick little overview of the different weapons in Tactics Memoriam. It lists whether they deal slashing, piercing, or breaking damage along with each weapon. Most physical weapons tend to deal the same type of damage, though there are some exceptions. For example, going back to swords, the Figment Sword and Bandit's Cutlass both deal slashing damage, but the Beastbone Rapier deals piercing damage. So it's good to keep an eye on how you are outfitting your unit's inventory so that they can deal with multiple different types of enemies. Let's talk a little bit about shields and wards. Now, shields and wards are basically the way that defense in Tactics Memoriam is possible. when you have a tabletop game system where you have stats for offense and defense that can be adjusted per level, and you're adding a die on top of that, it's going to be pretty rare for units to miss in Tactics Memoriam, which is why shields and wards were included. Shields and wards are boosts to units' physical and magical defense, their guard and reflect respectively, and they're pretty big boosts. In the base version of the game, the Novice Shield and the Novice Ward add +5 to their guard or reflect, and the Steady Shield and the Steady Ward add +10 to their guard or reflect. And when they are added to a unit's inventory, I recommend adding it in parentheses, so you know what is coming from the weapon, or excuse me, the item, versus what is coming from the unit. So basically, if you want to build a unit to counterattack, you are choosing to give them a shield and or a ward in their inventory instead of giving them weapons. It's kind of recommended to lean into having offensive or defensive units in Tactics Memoriam for that reason, because shields and wards really make defense in this game. And the effects of shields, like guard +10 with the Steady Shield, stack on top of bonuses from weapons. So if you have a Steady Shield, get your guard +10, you have a Beast Bone Rapier to have your guard +3 on top of that, boom, you suddenly have 13 more guard, and you might just not be able to be hit by physical attacks. It says in this section you cannot equip multiple shields or multiple wards, but you can equip a shield and a ward, just because I don't want it to be possible to grant like 20 defense that easily. You're gonna have some weakness here or there. If you decide to kit your unit out with 2 shields and a ward, then, well, your Ascended unit is stuck with only 1 weapon to attack with, which has its downsides. Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about skills. I scrolled past that section, so we're gonna bounce back to it now. I talked a little bit about it before in the overview, but there are 20 different skills in the base version of Tactics Memoriam that completely change the way that a unit plays, and they all have a bunch of fun, different effects. Some of my favorites are Lightning Barrage. After activating a Unison Strike, on a hit or miss, a unit may deal damage equal to their movement stat and optionally move to the closest square on the other side of their target. So you can kind of have your boom, 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 awesome 100 sword swings in 1 second and teleport to their other side and sheath your weapon with the Lightning Barrage ability. Or they are more simple things like Curving Strike. Unit can choose to attack diagonally with any weapon up to 2 range, but the damage dealt will be halved. Negotiator is one I want to playtest more. I'm not sure if it's overpowered yet. If unit attacks a target and leaves them with less than half HP without dropping them to 0, target can be persuaded to surrender and join the party if appropriate in story. I assume a good game master is going to balance that based on the situation. Anyway, there's a table of skills that you can roll for when new units join, or if you want to assign one to your antagonist or significant bosses. There's also some skills for antagonists only for when it is time for you to fight your final bosses. These skills are kind of crazy. I recommend keeping them a little bit of a secret from your players, because they include things like the champion being able to revive and gaining an extra movement and attack action when they are brought to 0 HP. These are crazy, and hopefully will feel fitting for your final boss in the beta version. We've talked about skills intermittently, so I don't think they need a full section to go into. So we are basically just on to the last few aspects of battle in the Expanding Your Journey section. Tactics Memoriam does feature options for tile effects and how often they occur. There are 4 different tile effects in Tactics Memoriam. Water. Upon entering this tile, unit loses 1 from their remaining movement this turn. Units that begin their turn on this tile lose 1 movement as they leave it. Burning. A unit crossing this tile takes 5 damage. If they begin their turn in it, they take 5 damage as well. Fortification. Units standing on a fortification tile receive a +5 bonus to their guard and reflect. Impassable. Tile cannot be entered or crossed through, including by flying units and units that can otherwise ignore terrain. So with these, you can kind of create some variance to your battlefield, and there's some examples as to what these might be. The only 2 weather effects in Tactics Memoriam are Rainstorm and Soul Cage, which limit unit movement, especially for flying units. And Soul Cage allows the battlefield to wrap around itself, so you can leave one side of the chessboard and appear on the other side. weather and tile effects are not essential to beginner gameplay, but hopefully will add some variance to the game as you start playing more advanced maps. There's a guide on enemy behavior here, which is important if you are playing solo. Basically, enemies, number one, try to make sure their objective is safe, that you can't like seize the tile or defeat the boss that easily. From there, they're going to try to finish off weakened or fragile units. If they can't do that, they're going to attack the biggest threat. If they can't do that, they're going to get in position to attack. It is encouraged that enemies are active and offensive, even on maps where they might be able to run away from your units indefinitely, because that's just not fun. Stage bosses, there are some options for how to power up the bosses of your levels, such as increasing their HP total, increasing their stats, giving them a skill that matches their personality, even giving them a second attack action or granting them a deathly technique gauge. And finally, end of battle rewards and resolving defeat. End of battle rewards, after you win a battle, you are going to kind of get variances on downtime actions. Roll twice on the item table, roll once on the weapons table, you claim a weapon or item from the stage boss's inventory, or you create and recruit a new character. So this can be a nice, fulfilling way to put a period on the combat. You can either roll a d4 to see which of these happen, or you can choose. And finally, resolving defeat. Sometimes you're going to lose battles. Sometimes all of your units will be defeated, gaining wounds in the process, possibly being welcomed into oblivion through that process. And unlike a video game, the story is just going to continue from there, right? Defeat doesn't mean the end. You can't win them all. Just ask yourself, who was it that defeated you? What were the consequences? And what comes next? Has this random boss become a more significant enemy? Was there an in-story consequence for you not being able to succeed? Like, was the settlement you were trying to protect destroyed? It's up to you to figure it out and see where the story goes from there. Alright, so that is about it for the combat tutorial for Tactics Memoriam. Between the system overview, the character creation and downtime overview, and the combat overview, you should have a pretty complete picture for how to play this game. Now, that said, I didn't want to just read the book to you, so there were some sections that I didn't go as in-depth with, like I didn't read you what every single polearm does. If that's something you want, let me know. I'll see what I can make happen. But for the most part, I would so much rather you just download this game for free. I'm not trying to sell you on choosing to download it, because you can just do it right now and look through it yourself. It is free, pay what you want on DriveThruRPG, and free on itch.io. If you have anything to give, I would so much rather it go towards the Tactics Memoriam Kickstarter, linked in the description. We are so close to our goal at the time of making this video. We are 91% of the way to our goal. And fulfilling that Kickstarter goal will help us not just create the fully illustrated digital rulebook, but hopefully with these stretch goals, we can create physical rulebooks as well. Rewards include things such as getting your character featured in the book as an illustration, or getting access to a quick start adventure that helps you dive into the game very quickly called Champions of the God Pit, potentially playing a game or a short campaign with me. There's a lot of reasons to help bring this game forward to life, but right now I'm just so grateful that you have watched this far. What are you waiting for? Play the game right now. You've watched every video. If you need more elaboration, let me know. Otherwise, enjoy your time with it. Thank you so much.